For the Yazidi peoples, Mount Sinjar in northern Iraq is their ancestral home. Their faith linked to ancient Mesopotamian religions. In 2014, ISIS began a campaign to eradicate the Yazidis. At least 5,000 people were killed. A massacre and a persecution the United Nations and others call genocide. Sally Armstrong is an award-winning journalist and human rights advocate. She has covered conflict in Bosnia, Somalia, Afghanistan, and has just returned from Iraq. We met for our conversation at the University of Toronto. One of the most persecuted groups in Iraq are the Yazidis. It's been described as genocide, what has happened to them. I know you've met with Yazidi women and Yazidi families. Tell me a little bit about what they told you about their experience.
They're not only one of the most persecuted groups in Iraq, their story is one of the worst stories I've ever heard, ever. And what they had to say, you know, ISIS have picked on the Yazidis because they call them infidels. And it's such hogwash, their reasoning behind why they pick on the Yazidis. And it is a genocide. The UN has called it a genocide. Our own government has called it a genocide. But Alison, it's the 74th genocide for these people. And now they've raised their own political ire. They want this stopped. They want assurances from the world. And they want to know, when can they go home and when are they safe to go home again? The stories they told me are almost unspeakable.
I know you've met individually with some of them. Is there a particular face or a particular story that stands out for you?
Well, I guess particularly the girls who were taken as sex slaves and escaped. And the stories they told me about what ISIS did to them, some of the young girls said, I don't even know how to describe it. I've never heard of such a thing. The sexual atrocities that were committed against these kids. One 12-year-old told me she was a sex slave to a man who tied her up and kept her at the end of his prayer rug. And when he was finished bowing to the east and saying his prayers, he would turn around, untie her, and rape her right there. What kind of people are these? And how come we're not so outraged about this? So there's stories, but you know, the older women told me stories that they said to me, they took our honor, they took our men, they took our girls, they've taken everything from us. And they're without information. 3,600 girls are still missing, still with ISIS. All these Yazidis, 450,000 of them, are in refugee camps in Dahouk. And there's a horror story in every tent. This has been going on for 2.5 years. And now they've landed on our radar.
What hope do they have? I mean, not only is there a genocide going on that's directed against them, but they're also living in the midst of a war that's got broader implications.
Yeah, well, you know, people have hope. People have hope. They have a hope that it will end. They have hope they can go home, that someone will have their back this time, that they will rebuild. But as you say very wisely, Iraq is in a very precarious situation. All these people come from what's called Nunavut province. And they refer to the people who come from Nunavut as the root people, the original people. The Armenians, the Kurds, the Yazidis, the Sunnis, they started there thousands of years ago. Now, the only people left in Nunavut province are Sunnis. And it was the governor of Dahouk, Governor Atrushi, who said to me, the big test will be when the people come back to Nunavut province. If they can live together, we can move forward. If they cannot, he said, Iraq will split.
What's left of their homes, though? What have they got? I mean, in spite of those sort of tribal sectarian tensions, what's left of their homes to go back to?
I went to Shingal. I went to over the mountain. I saw their escape route. I saw where ISIS came from. In fact, we saw the smoke of an ISIS group while we were there, and the guy was who said, I think we're leaving immediately. So Shingal city, which is where most of them come from, is flattened. You know, it reminded me of Pompeii, that there was evidence that people were living their lives when an alarm was sounded. There's pots on the stove, there's toys in the yard, but the place is flattened. It needs complete, it's like we saw in Sarajevo or in Kabul. All those lessons we presumably learned, the place is flattened. The livestock are dead, the gardens are withered, the place is done.
Tell me a little bit about the humanitarian effort that's going on there now.
Well, there's nothing in Shingal, of course, because
Right.
they can't even access it safely now. But I was quite dazzled by the humanitarian work going on, an awful lot by Canada, by the way, in and around Duhok, which is where all the refugees are.
Right.
Because it's changed. Now, maybe everybody already knew that. I didn't know that. I'll give you an example. The World Food Program used to hand out a basket of nutritious food for your family. Well, who made that decision? Was it made in New York? Was it made in the UK? They've changed now, and they give cash, $17 US per person per month. And it's amazing to see the rapid action that comes from that change in delivery method. The local markets recover, they say, within days. The people buy the food their families like to eat. No kidding. And they have dignity. They go to the market with their own money to buy their own food. So these things are making enormous differences. And I talked to dozens of people who are part of this program. But another one I noticed, and Canada's very much involved in this one, I met with women's groups. I think there were 12 leaders of women's groups from all over Iraq. And Canada's funding their meetings because they feel it's important that the women be at the table when the reorganization is discussed as the war ends. I never heard of this happening before. I mean, even the UN couldn't pull it off with 1325, and these women they're real leaders. There's no fooling around about the goals they have for their communities. So this is to push them to be at the table when the decisions are being made about the future. So everywhere I went, I went to see the mine clearance people. And I was used to seeing mine clearance in Sarajevo, in other places. This is very different because this is more the improvised explosive device. And the men doing it, and some women, told me they're clearing these things out of people's fridges, out of cupboards, off their computers. And many of them are in the shape of children's toys. This is the hideous nature, the size of the hatred of this insurgency.
Thank you very much for telling us about it.
Thank you.
If you'd like to know more about the Yazidis' story, Sally has written a full-length article which will be featured in the magazine The United Church Observer.